have spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action. All right, now a couple other points I want to address. Putin gave a very good speech, very well thought out, intricate, speech that he gave, on before recognizing Donetsk and Luhansk. It was a long speech, and it was compared to anything that any U.S. leader has given. I mean, this was a very complex speech. He got into the history of Ukraine, how it was formed, and what's been happening, and it was hard hitting. This guy did his homework, he brought facts, and he laid it all on the table. I don't know of any U.S. president who has ever given a speech anywhere near as intricate, as well thought out, containing so many facts as what Putin did. Go and watch Putin's speech for yourself. Right? It was a great speech. And for a while, they were showing it on CNN, and then they were like, oh, shit, kill it. People in America might hear this and realize not only that he actually has a lot of very good points, but also that our leaders are fucking retarded and Putin's a genius. I mean, this is like, Putin's a very, very smart man. I have been in the same room as Putin 3 or 4 times. He's a very intelligent person. He is not a fool. He's a brilliant, brilliant man, a brilliant strategist, very, very well informed about geopolitics, economics. This guy knows his shit, and he knows what he's doing. And he rescued Russia from the disaster of the 1990s with economic planning. He developed a model for rescuing Russia's economy with Gazprom and Rosneft. And this guy is a very, very effective strategic negotiator, strategic planner. He's really into geopolitics. He knows his stuff. And Putin, before he recognized, he knew the United States was going to come down on him. He had to explain how he was going to do it. And so he gave a speech. And I have seen so many people misrepresenting this speech. Okay, is Putin a communist? Of course not. Of course he's not a communist. Putin is not a communist. If you think Putin's a communist, you are deeply misinformed. But, Putin is not a communist. And it wasn't a communist speech, per se, but the speech said a lot of things that a communist could agree with. One thing that it pointed out was that the fall of the Soviet Union was a disaster for the entire region, right? All my life, I've been told that, communism failed. Communism didn't work. And in 1991, Russia got freedom. It's been so amazing when Russia got free. And, communism was just nothing but starvation and death and misery. That's not what Putin said in his speech. Putin talked about how the Soviet Union built Ukraine. The Soviet Union industrialized Ukraine. The Soviet Union created the modern Ukraine. And in fact, it was Lenin who drew the borders for what is now Ukraine. And then Khrushchev added Crimea, and Stalin added some other parts of it. And there would not be a country known as Ukraine if it wasn't for the Bolsheviks. That the Bolshevik national policy of recognizing different nationalities is responsible for the creation of modern Ukraine. And the Soviet Union industrialized Ukraine. I bet you didn't know that at one point, Ukraine had the world's largest hydroelectrical power plant. The biggest power plant in the world was in Ukraine. And you know who built it? Stalin. During the 5-year plans, they built the Dnieper Dam. The biggest hydroelectrical power plant in the world was built in Ukraine. Under the Soviet Union, Ukraine was fully electrified. Under the Soviet Union, Ukraine was fully industrialized. They wiped out illiteracy. They brought running water and electricity to the whole country. The Soviet Union, socialism, created Ukraine. And since Western capitalism has come back into Ukraine, Ukraine has gotten poorer and poorer and poorer. right? And that the fall of the Soviet Union devastated Ukraine economically. Putin talked about all of that in his speech. You will never hear that on American television. They never want to acknowledge basic economic data. Ukraine under the Soviet Union, good. Ukraine since the fall of the Soviet Union, bad. That's basic economic data. Life expectancy has gone down. Living conditions have gotten worse. That's a basic fact. If you compare life in Ukraine at the time of the Soviet Union to life in Ukraine ever since then, life has gotten worse. And poll after poll after poll has shown that Ukrainians, even ones that are virulently anti-Russian, admit that life was better under the Soviet Union. Putin recognized that and said that the fall of the Soviet Union has been bad for Ukraine. It's been bad for the whole region. If that is not a pro-communist talking point, I don't know what is. But everyone's focusing on a point that Putin made, criticizing Vladimir Lenin, which is completely fair, right? And I think Putin has a point. Now, obviously, Zhuganov and the leaders of the Communist Party, they don't agree with this. And that's okay. We can disagree, right? But I think Putin has a point when he says that Lenin's obsession with labeling different peoples throughout the Soviet Union as nationalities weakened the Soviet Union. Now, that is a point that Putin has. This isn't the first time he said this. He said this many times that, Lenin, right? First of all, under Karl Marx, there was no nationalism. Karl Marx was opposed to all nationalism. He said it's just the workers against the bosses. Workers of the world unite. And in the final years of Marx's life, he started to say, maybe I'm wrong about that, because he realized that the Irish people were being oppressed. And they weren't being oppressed just because they're workers. They were being oppressed on the basis of being Irish, of their Irish nationality. In a lot of cases, they were being oppressed because they were Roman Catholics. And so Karl Marx started to argue that Irish nationalism, even though it wasn't communist, was progressive. And Karl Marx's daughter started wearing a crucifix around her neck to support the Irish people. And in England, in London, they used to hang Irish revolutionary fighters. They used to hang Irish people who had fought for their country. They would drag them to London and they would hang them in the public square. And Jenny Marx, Karl Marx's daughter, put a crucifix around her neck. Protested against these executions of Irish revolutionaries. And if you can imagine about how unpopular that might be, they're going to drag some Irish revolutionaries into some big square in London, and they're going to hang them, and there's all these people that are excited to watch them hanged, and you're standing outside there with a sign saying freedom for Ireland. You're protesting that. That it takes courage. And especially if you're Jenny Marx, the daughter of Karl Marx, you're not born in London. That's some heroic activity. And Karl Marx, in his final years, came to understand that the Irish people fighting for their national liberation as Irish people, even if they weren't communists, even if they weren't socialists, even if they weren't revolutionaries. I mean, they were revolutionaries, but if they were revolutionaries on their national basis, on the basis of their nationalism, that was correct. And I believe Karl Marx also began to support the people of Poland and in their, national liberation aspirations. And so Marx died, but Lenin, studying Marx's writings on the Irish question, studying Marx's teachings about Poland and looking into it, Lenin wrote his very famous thesis on the national question. And Lenin argued that oppressed nations fighting for their national liberation was progressive and should be supported. And he came to that conclusion. And Rosa Luxemburg vehemently disagreed with Karl Marx about that. Rosa Luxemburg said, no, all nationalism is inherently reactionary. All nationalism is inherently reactionary. And she disagreed with him. A lot of Marxists disagreed with disagree with Lenin on that point, but that became the position of the Bolshevik Party, was that all nations have the right to national liberation. And what Putin argued in his speech is that belief that all nations have the right to national liberation, he took it a bit too far. And that when the Bolsheviks came to power in Russia, they went to all the different peoples throughout the Soviet Union and they started declaring them to be nations. And in doing that, he planted the seeds of dividing the peoples of the region, right? For example, Belarus. What is Belarus? What is Belarus? It's white Russia, right? So, it's Russia. It's just white Russia, right? It's just the part of the country, So is Belarus a separate nation? I don't know. I mean, Alexander Lukashenko certainly thinks it does. And I wouldn't feel comfortable as somebody who's not from there and doesn't speak the language and has no idea. I would never feel comfortable going up to a Belarusian and saying, you're not a nation. It's just a part of Russia. It's white Russia. I wouldn't feel comfortable saying that. I don't know enough about it. I'm not from there. All right. I don't know. But it is a little bit weird that Belarus means white Russia. And the Ukrainian language is very close to the Russian language. And, there's Moldova, there's other regions. And basically, Putin argued that by going around to all of these groups in the Soviet Union, and by saying you're a nation and you're going to have your own language and you're going to have, your own national identity, and we're going to have a house of nationalities in the Soviet government. We're going to have the Supreme Soviet on the one hand, and then we're going to have the Soviet of nationalities, and we're going to give every nation one of their own seats, and they're going to be a nation. That by doing this, he wasn't bringing the people together. That's what Putin argued. And that might be right. I don't know. I'm not from there. I've been over there a few times, and I don't feel comfortable saying that Putin's necessarily wrong about this. He might be right. He might be wrong. He might be right. But that was a very big part of what the Bolsheviks believed, right? As they referred to the Tsarist Empire as a prison house of nations. And they really believed that one of the main points of their revolution was going to these different nationalities and giving them their own. And these people, they wouldn't even have their own, a lot of them wouldn't have their own written language if it wasn't for the Bolsheviks. Going to these various nationalities and uplifting them on a national basis. And let's not forget that, the most important book written on the question of nationalities was not written by Lenin, because Lenin was a Russian. And Lenin was a Russian. He had some Jewish heritage, but he was ethnically Russian for the most part. And Lenin didn't feel comfortable writing the book on nationalities. So who wrote it? Stalin. Why? Why did Stalin write the book? The book on the national question, published by the Bolsheviks, was written by Stalin. And why was it written by Stalin? Stalin wasn't Russian. Yeah, I know that's a shocker, right? How can Stalin not be Russian? He was the leader of the Soviet Union. Stalin wasn't Russian. Stalin was not Russian. Stalin wasn't Russian. Stalin was Georgian. Stalin was from Georgia. And not from the state next to Alabama either. He's from Georgia in Central Asia. Stalin was from Georgia, the oppressed nation of Georgia, which was declared a nation by the Soviet Union, had a seat in the House of Nationalities. Stalin was from Georgia. He was a Georgian. I heard it in the speech I was watching. And he said in the speech, he said, it's so ironic that modern Ukraine was created by the Soviet Union, right? It was Lenin who basically declared, that Ukraine would be a separate republic in the Union of Soviet republics, and that added certain territory to it. And Stalin added other territory to it. And Khrushchev added Crimea to Ukraine. Crimea would never have been considered part of Ukraine, but Khrushchev, for whatever reason, changed the borders of Ukraine and put Crimea in it. And so Putin remarked, he said, it's so funny that these people that are Ukrainian nationalists are constantly talking about decommunization, because there wouldn't be a Ukraine if it weren't for communism. Lenin, the guy who created modern Ukraine, they're tearing down all the statues to him. They're tearing down all the statues to Lenin. And they're tearing down all the statues to Stalin. And they're tearing down all the Soviet memorials. And again, there would not be a modern Ukraine if it weren't for the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union designed it. And he said, so these people really want to decommunize. Maybe we will. And he was hinting at the fact that, if these people really, really want to completely decommunize, then they'll be absorbed back into Russia. Because, again, it's actually a pretty good remark. It's a pretty sophisticated dig. It's a pretty sophisticated dig. There would be no Ukraine if it weren't for the Soviet Union. If it weren't for Lenin and Stalin and Khrushchev, there would be no Ukraine. And these people are always tearing down the memorials to Lenin and Stalin and Khrushchev and people like that who built modern Ukraine. And he says, so if these people really want to decommunize, maybe we can make that happen. It's a dig. It's a dig. It was brilliant. It's a brilliant dig. Basically, he said, we created your ass. We created your ass. Okay. And, you want to get communism completely out of Ukraine? Well, liquidate Ukraine then, because communism made you guys. That's what he's saying. It's a brilliant dig, actually. It's a very sophisticated dig. And it's a very good point. And I mean, and with Ukraine threatening Russia, with Ukraine tearing down all the memorials to communism. And he says, I think, you really want to decommunize, because we decommunize, then there's no more Ukraine. That's the point he was making. And that's a fair point, I think. I think it's a fair point, right? And again, I see that misrepresented. Keep seeing this misrepresented online by, people are saying, oh, it was a fiery anti-communist speech. No, it was a speech on the history of Russia and Ukraine. It was a speech about how the fall of the Soviet Union was bad. It was a speech about how Ukraine has economically suffered because of the fall of the Soviet Union. It was a speech about how the crazy anti-communist government in Ukraine is kind of hypocritical. I'm not hearing this as like a crazy anti-communist speech. Now, there were some things that people have taken issue with about, the fall of the Tsar, right? Now, the Tsar was actually toppled in the February Revolution rather than the October Revolution. There's things you can nitpick about, okay? And that's fine. And that's for the Russians to do. It's not for me to do. I'm not Russian. I'm not Ukrainian. I'm not going to get into that. But it was a pretty damn good speech. I would say that Putin is far smarter than any president we've had in the United States in the last 50, 60, maybe even 100 years, okay? Our presidents compared to Putin are dumb, okay? Putin is a very intelligent man. This is a really smart man. He means what he says, and he says what he means. He thinks through things very, very carefully. He's very, very calculated. He knows what he's doing. There's a reason CNN, they were playing him. He was making his points, and they're like, chill it. And they pulled him off of there because he was making sense. And he wasn't even reading from cue cards. People notice he wasn't reading from a teleprompter. He wasn't even reading from a goddamn teleprompter. It's a damn good speech, and you can agree with it. You can disagree with it. But it was a damn good speech. It was very intelligent. He made coherent arguments. And the last thing the U.S. government ever wants you to do is go watch it right now. So if you really want to make Biden mad, you really want to make Donald Trump mad, go and watch that speech, because then you'll learn something. That's what I've got to say about that.